Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine you're a leader, maybe at a big UK company.
Right.
There was research back in 2019 showing, well, a huge number, 72% of leaders in the FTSE 350 saw cyber threats as a high risk.
Yeah, a high business risk.
Yeah.
Seems like a good sign initially. They know it's serious.
You'd think so. But the flip side of that same research was, well, less encouraging.
Almost half of them, right?
Yeah.
46% admitted they didn't really understand the risks themselves.
Exactly. So you have this big gap. Awareness, yes. Understanding, not so much.
And this isn't happening in isolation. While leaders are sort of grappling with this, the threats themselves, they're ramping up big time.
There's that Hiscox report, also 2019. It found 61% of companies had faced an attack in the last year.
Which was up significantly, wasn't it? From 45% the year before.
Yeah, big jump. And the cost.
Oh, the cost went way up too. That same report put the average cost at $369,000, up 61%.
Wow.
If you're talking bigger companies, say over 1,000 employees,
yeah,
the odds were even higher. 74% of those got hit.
So the message is pretty clear. This isn't just, an IT department issue anymore.
Absolutely not. It's fundamental business risk.
Yeah.
Needs leadership focus, direct focus.
Which really sets up what we want to do in this deep dive. We're looking at excerpts from an article, Cybersecurity and the Strategic Business Leader, and some related reports that mentions Hiscox, ACCA, DTEC Systems, UK government stuff too.
Right. And the goal is to kind of cut through the noise. What do strategic leaders and future leaders listening to this really need to grasp about cybersecurity now? Why
is it such a critical issue right now? Why maybe it's different from other risks? And what are the practical steps recommended by these sources?
Think of it as getting equipped, giving you the perspective you need to talk about this stuff, assess risk, and understand what good controls look like in today's world.
Okay, so let's really dig back into that core problem we started with, this awareness versus understanding gap. Why is it there?
Well, it's fascinating when you look at the context that UK government research, 72% of FTSE 350 leaders saying high risk, that's awareness.
They see the news, they know it's a threat.
Exactly. The label is recognized, but then 46% saying, I don't really understand it. That's the strategic hurdle.
It's like knowing smoking is bad for you, but not really grasping the specific diseases or the addiction mechanism.
Kinda, yeah. It prevents a really effective strategic response if the people at the top don't fully get the why and the how.
And as that Hiscox data showed, this confusion is happening exactly when attacks are getting more frequent, more expensive, especially for bigger firms.
Awareness is up, but maybe the deep understanding, the strategic defense, hasn't quite caught up yet.
So why does cybersecurity need this special focus? The sources argue it's not just another line item in risk management.
Right. They point to 4 key factors that have really changed the game.
Okay, let's break those down. Okay. Factor 1, the sheer value and volume of data.
Oh, absolutely critical. The amount of data is just staggering. That ACCA report mentioned 90% of all the world's data was created since 2016.
90% since 2016. That's incredible.
And it's not just sitting there. With AI, machine learning, this data is being used to completely change how businesses operate, how they interact with customers.
It makes that quote, I think it was The Economist in 2017, calling data the new oil. It really lands, doesn't it?
It does. And if it's that valuable, well, it becomes a prime target.
Which leads straight into the second factor. People historically didn't realize how vulnerable this data could be.
Yeah, there was a certain naivety, maybe. You had stories from, the early 2010s, like Mark Zuckerberg apparently calling early Facebook users dumb for sharing so much.
Maybe people just didn't see the downside then.
Possibly not the full extent. The real wake-up call, strategically speaking, was probably Cambridge Analytica in 2018.
Ah, right. Using Facebook data.
Harvested from 50 million users, used to influence elections. That showed it wasn't just about losing email addresses. This was about potentially undermining democratic processes, manipulating opinion on a massive scale.
That really changed the conversation about data risk. It became societal, political.
Suddenly, leaders had to see data risk as potentially existential, affecting reputation, trust, even the foundations of society. Much bigger than just an operational glitch.
A huge shift. Okay, factor 3. How we now store and share all this data. The cloud.
The cloud is strategically vital. Lets companies scale, handle huge data sets, support remote work. Indispensable, really.
Huh.
But, as the source points out, moving data outside your own 4 walls, using these external services, it creates new pathways, new potential entry points for attackers.
So the convenience comes with inherent exposure.
Exactly. The strategic challenge is balancing the benefits with managing those new vulnerabilities effectively. How do you use the cloud safely?
Got it. And the fourth factor is maybe the most unsettling, the idea that software bugs are basically inevitable.
Yeah, this one's really fundamental for strategic thinking. Modern software is just incredibly complex.
The source used the example of a car.
A new car having maybe over 100 million lines of code. Humans simply cannot write that much code without errors or find every single weakness.
So every complex system has potential backdoors built in, just waiting.
Pretty much. Which means, strategically, you can't just focus on prevention. Building impenetrable walls is impossible.
Because the flaws might already be inside.
Right. So leaders need to accept that breaches aren't just possible, they're probably inevitable at some point. And that shifts the focus. It becomes less about just prevention and more about resilience, detection, and crucially, recovery.
Understanding those four factors, data value, vulnerability awareness, cloud exposure, inherent bugs, really highlights why this isn't just business as usual risk. It needs dedicated strategic attention.
Absolutely. It frames the problem in a way that demands board-level engagement.
So what do the sources suggest we actually do about it? They mentioned the UK's NCSC.
Yes, the National Cybersecurity Center.
Yeah.
Set up by the government in 2016. They have a framework called the 10 Steps, which the article presents as practical focus areas for any organization.
Okay, let's walk through these. Step 1.
Risk management regime. Basically, make cyber risk explicit in your overall risk policy. Don't let directors shy away just because it sounds technical.
So frame it in business impact terms. Make it a regular board topic.
Exactly. Needs ownership at the top.
Step 2. Network security. Sounds like the basics. Locking the digital doors.
That's the idea. Securing the perimeter, controlling data flow in and out. Foundational stuff. But, harder now with cloud and remote access, blurring that perimeter.
Which makes step 3, user education and awareness, even more critical, I imagine.
Hugely. The sources are clear. Users are often the weakest link. Not maliciously, usually, but through mistakes or being tricked.
Phishing emails, bad links.
Right. So strategic investment in ongoing training is key, making sure your people understand the threats and their role in preventing them. It's about building that human firewall, a security culture.
Step 4, malware prevention. Viruses, ransomware, that kind of thing.
Yes. Protecting your computers and systems. The key strategic point here is that it's not set and forget. You need good, up-to-date security software.
Because the threats change constantly.
Daily. Reputable vendors update constantly. So it's an ongoing investment, not a one-off purchase.
Okay. Step 5, feel specific. Removable media controls. USB sticks and the like.
Seems small, but it's a major weak point. Easy way to bypass network defenses. And that detect systems stat is eye-opening.
What was that again?
74% of staff they surveyed in 2019 admitted finding ways around the controls for things like USB drives.
74%. So the tech control isn't enough if people are actively bypassing it.
Precisely. It highlights the need for clear policy, enforcement, and user understanding of why the rule exists. It's a physical vector into the digital world.
Makes sense. Step 6, secure configuration.
This is about setting up hardware and software securely from the start. Standard builds, restricted settings.
Like a default secure setup for every company laptop.
Exactly. Don't leave unnecessary doors open. Reduce the attack surface from the beginning.
Step 7, managing user privileges. Who gets access to what?
Standard practice like separation of duties. But again, human behavior gets in the way. That other detect stat.
The 95% one.
Yeah, 95% of users actively tried to circumvent security policies. Often not for bad reasons, maybe sharing a password to help a colleague quickly.
But it undermines the whole system.
Totally. It creates a culture where bypassing rules is normal. So strategically, you need policies that are secure and practical, plus constant reinforcement of security awareness.
Okay, step 8, incident response. If attacks are inevitable, you need a plan.
Absolutely vital. How do you minimize damage when it happens? Things like having good, tested offsite backups are crucial for recovery.
And learning from it afterwards.
Yes. The response plan needs to cover immediate containment and post-incident analysis to figure out what went wrong and how to improve. It's about bouncing back and getting stronger.
Step 9, monitoring. Watching what's happening on the network.
And crucially, not just looking for successful attacks. Spotting the failed attempts is strategically valuable.
Why is that?
It tells you where attackers are probing, what they're interested in, maybe which defenses are working well, or which areas need more attention.
Like the example of sending fake phishing emails internally.
Perfect example. You monitor who clicks, not to punish them, but to identify who needs more training, using monitoring for proactive risk reduction.
And the final step, number 10, home and mobile working. Even more relevant now than in 2019.
For sure. The shift to remote work blew the traditional perimeter wide open.
So controls need to follow the user.
Exactly. Ensuring home devices are secure, mandating things like VPNs for secure connections, managing access from anywhere. It's about securing the distributed workforce.
So those 10 steps from the NCSC offer a really comprehensive checklist. Technical, human, procedural.
Solid foundation for any organization.
But the article we're drawing from also zooms in on one specific function, finance, and the CFO's role.
Yes, it highlights an ACCA report, cyber, and the CFO. The core message is that finance leaders, the CFO especially, cannot just delegate this to IT.
They need a business-wide view, not just technical.
Precisely. They have to be proactive, understand the commercial implications. It's a financial risk, a business continuity risk.
So what specific actions does that ACCA report recommend for the CFO?
First, they need to champion redefining risk and resilience. And this involves pushing towards what's called a zero trust model.
Zero trust. We touched on that idea of inherent flaws, meaning you can't fully trust anything. How does a CFO engage with that?
From a finance angle, it's about understanding the investment needed for a system where you don't automatically trust users or devices just because they're inside.
You verify everything every time.
Essentially, yes. Think about the two-factor authentication you use for your bank. Applying that kind of principle systematically across the business, the CFO needs to see this not just as a cost, but as a strategic investment in reducing fundamental risk.
Okay, a significant shift in thinking. What's the second action for the CFO?
Focus on recovery plans. Since perfect prevention isn't realistic, the ability to manage an attack while it's happening and recover quickly afterwards is critical.
So the CFO needs to quantify the cost of downtime, data loss, reputational damage.
Yes, and ensure the business continuity and disaster recovery plans are properly resourced and tested. Recovery capability is a form of risk mitigation.
All right. Third action.
Audit your supply chain. Your security is only as strong as your weakest link, and often that's a third-party vendor connected to your systems.
So the risk extends beyond your own walls.
Absolutely. The CFO needs to ensure there's due diligence on the cybersecurity practices of key suppliers. A breach via a supplier can be just as damaging financially and operationally.
Makes total sense. And the final action recommended for the CFO.
Invest in cyber insurance. It's a financial backstop. Helps cover costs if the worst happens.
But the report says the CFO's role here is crucial.
Yes, because to get the right insurance, and for the board to understand its value, the CFO needs to help quantify the potential financial damage of different cyber attack scenarios. Put a number on the risk you're trying to insure against.
And there was that stark warning attached to this section too.
A very important one. Do not pay ransomware attackers.
Tempting as it might be in a crisis.
Extremely tempting, perhaps. But the source is emphatic. Paying signals you're a willing target, making you more likely to be hit again. It funds the criminals. The CFO needs to stand firm on a policy of non-payment, even under pressure.
So the ACCA report really puts the onus on finance leaders. The quote was something like, "Don't wait for an attack, don't wait for the fine."
Yeah, they need to get ahead of it, understand its relevance to their function, stay informed. It's a core part of their job now.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. What are the big takeaways from this deep dive into the source material?
Well, first, cyber risk is huge, it's growing, and it's driven by some powerful forces. The incredible value of data, a history of maybe not appreciating its vulnerability the way we use tech like the cloud, and fundamentally the fact that software itself is complex and inherently flawed.
And tackling it requires a really broad approach, right? Not just tech fixes.
Definitely. It needs strategic leadership, covering the technical side, sure, but also the human element, user education, security culture, plus robust processes for things like incident response, supply chain management, following frameworks like those NCSC steps.
When specific leaders like the CFO have a critical role to play, they can't just see it as an IT cost.
No, they have to take that commercial business-wide view, championing things like zero trust, focusing on recovery, auditing partners, using financial tools like insurance, smartly and crucially, refusing to pay ransoms.
So for you listening, whether you're already in a strategic role or heading that way, or even if you just want to be truly informed about modern business, grasping these points is Wow, essential.
It really is. It equips you to understand the discussions, evaluate what your organization is doing, and ask the important questions.
Pulling all this together from the sources, there's a final thought that emerges, maybe a provocative one. Given everything we've heard about the inevitability of attacks, the inherent bugs in software, does real cybersecurity leadership today mean shifting focus? Maybe less emphasis on trying to achieve perfect prevention, which seems almost impossible.
And more on building that deep organizational resilience, that rapid recovery capability, really embedding that zero trust philosophy everywhere.
Exactly. If that's the case, what does that strategic shift really mean for how businesses should invest? How should they fundamentally change the way they operate day to day?
That's a big question. Definitely something to think about as you look at the future of business risk.